All right, welcome to another deep dive. We're all about extracting those golden nuggets of insight from really fascinating material.
Directly for you.
Yeah, for you, the listener. You're here, I think, because you just love to, get right to the heart of things.
Get to the core.
The core, yeah. That's what we do here, quickly and thoroughly.
Exactly.
So today we're diving into the work of Ron Ritchhart and his framework for, he calls it cultures of thinking.
Yeah, cultures of thinking.
So right away, I think you can kind of get a sense of what we're going for here. Like a learning environment, but like one that's really designed for thought.
Really designed for thought.
But I think what we're going to find is how deep this concept really goes.
Yeah.
And all the different practical ways we can think about it.
Yeah, and it's really relevant to anyone who's interested in, cultivating just deep learning and really sharp thinking.
Yeah, for sure.
No matter where you're starting from.
No matter where you're starting from, exactly.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is really unpack these ideas, and we're going to do it by looking at a bunch of Ritchart's work. And it's really impressive because he touches on just about everything.
Yeah, he really covers a lot of ground.
He does, from everyday classroom practices to big leadership strategies.
Yeah, all with this theme of making thinking visible and valued.
Yeah.
Really valued.
Absolutely.
That's the core, I think.
Yeah, and he covers so much. So what we're going to try to do is pull out the stuff that's really essential.
Yeah.
So you don't have to read all of his books.
Exactly.
So let's just jump into it. In Ritchart's view, what fundamentally is a culture of thinking? What does he mean by that?
Yeah, so at its core, it's really about this group atmosphere.
Like a feeling.
A feeling, yeah. Where thinking isn't just something that happens by chance.
Right.
It's really
It's
prized.
important.
It's important, it's displayed, it's nurtured.
You can see it.
You can see it, yeah. It signifies a move beyond just getting the right answer. To really respecting the process.
Right, the journey.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the destination.
Exactly. He emphasizes that this kind of environment leads to a really deep commitment to learning,
Okay.
both individually and as a group.
So you're all in it together.
Yeah, you're all in it together. And when thinking itself is held in such high regard, it's natural for individuals to become more invested in their own growth, but also in the growth of those around them.
So it's contagious almost.
Yeah, it is. There's this synergy that develops.
I like that.
Yeah. And then he also brings up this concept of powerful learning opportunities.
Okay.
So these are experiences that are designed to be accessible to everyone at the start.
Anyone can, get into it.
Yeah, he calls them low entry barriers.
Low entry barriers.
But they also have a really high ceiling for challenge and growth.
So even if you're already pretty advanced, you can still be challenged.
Yeah, think of it as an invitation to explore, but it stays engaging no matter how far you go.
That's really powerful, that idea of powerful learning opportunities.
Yeah.
Especially thinking about how to keep people engaged and growing, like you said.
Yeah.
So we've got this idea that thinking is valued.
Mm-hmm.
But the source material also gets into some specifics, some characteristics of a culture of thinking. What are we actually looking for? What are the key traits?
Yeah, so this is where we go from the broad idea to something more concrete.
Okay.
He talks about this shift in what we prioritize in learners. So traditionally, education has really focused on those easily tested academic skills.
Right.
But a culture of thinking values a much wider range of intellectual dispositions, or what he calls habits of mind.
Habits of mind. So
Yeah.
patterns.
Patterns, yeah.
Yeah.
Consistent patterns of intellectual behavior.
Okay, give us some examples. What are some of those habits of mind?
So he draws from a few influential frameworks. There's intellectual character,
Okay.
and that brings up traits like curiosity, just that innate drive to explore and ask questions.
That makes sense.
Yeah, then there's open-mindedness, that willingness to consider different ideas and perspectives.
To be open to being wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And strategic thinking.
So planning.
Yeah, approaching challenges with a plan. There's also healthy skepticism, which involves questioning assumptions and a commitment to truth-seeking.
So not just taking things at face value.
No. And then there's metacognition.
Oh, that's a big one.
It is. That's the ability to think about your own thinking,
Right.
to understand your own processes.
It's so important, but not always easy.
No, it's not. But it's key in a culture of thinking.
That's a pretty comprehensive list.
Yeah.
And it definitely goes way beyond just those traditional academic measures.
Absolutely. These are qualities that matter outside of school, too.
Yeah, like in the real world.
Yeah, in the real world.
Yeah.
And he also points out the overlap with other educational philosophies, like the International Baccalaureate Learner Profile.
Right.
Yeah. They talk about being inquirers, thinkers, communicators, risk takers.
Good things.
Yeah. And also being open-minded, reflective, knowledgeable. And then there's the Building Learning Power Initiative. They focus on the 4 R's: reflectiveness, resourcefulness, reciprocity, and resilience.
So again, thinking about the whole person.
Exactly. The message across all these approaches is that we're trying to cultivate a well-rounded individual, someone who's prepared for the real world, the complexities of today's world,
Yeah.
someone who's good at critical thinking, creative problem solving, and thoughtful engagement. It's less about a static body of knowledge and more about having a set of tools to keep learning and applying knowledge effectively.
It's like, it's not just what you know,
Right.
it's how you think.
It's how you think, yeah.
That's really interesting. So it seems like we need to kind of rethink what the purpose of education is.
Yeah, and he actually talks about this idea of telling a different story of learning.
Okay, what does he mean by that?
He says that the dominant story of learning in a lot of schools today is about linearity and conformity.
Linearity and conformity.
Yeah, like learning is this predetermined path
Uh-huh.
that students are supposed to follow, and the goal is to get into a good college.
Right, the best college you can.
And this whole linear perspective misses the fact that human development is more organic, more individual.
Right.
It also creates this feeling of competition.
Like a race.
Yeah, like a race. Education becomes this race to the finish line.
Yeah, I can see that.
And he argues that this dominant story can actually disconnect people from their talents and their passions.
Interesting.
Yeah. He even mentions Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk.
Oh, yeah, the one about how schools kill creativity.
That's the one. Robinson talks about how this narrow focus in education can actually take away from people's strengths.
And you mentioned Jason's story about school being a silent place.
Yeah.
That really speaks to that disconnect, right? Like, we're supposed to be quiet and work alone, but talking is how we process ideas.
Right. And then Ruth had that one class that was so different.
That was really impactful.
Yeah. And it highlights the power of contrast, like when learning feels meaningful and engaging.
Yeah, when it clicks.
So the challenge is to really look at the story of learning that we're telling right now and see if it lines up with what we really want for our students. Are we nurturing their potential and helping them become thoughtful adults? Or are we just focused on things like test scores?
It's a big question.
It is. And speaking of that, listener, think about the environments you've been in where the focus felt more on just complying than really inquiring. What did that do to your own desire to learn and understand?
That's a good question to think about. So if we want to cultivate thinkers and we want to tell this different story, how do we actually do that in the classroom?
Yeah.
The next point is making thinking visible.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Why is that so important in a culture of thinking?
Because it gives you a window into how people are understanding.
Like, you can actually see the process.
Yeah, exactly. You can see how they're making meaning, not just what they remember.
Okay.
It reveals their insights, their reasoning, and even their misconceptions.
It's like we're shining a light on what's happening inside their heads.
Yeah, exactly. And by making thinking visible, we get the information we need to design those powerful learning opportunities we talked about.
To keep them moving forward.
Yeah, to propel understanding and keep them engaged. Richart says that once we see how students are thinking, we can be much better at supporting them.
Okay.
And he even says that thinking itself can become something we develop.
Wait, so we can actually get better at thinking?
Yeah, when we can see it and work with it, we can refine it and improve it.
I like that. So what specific kinds of thinking are we trying to bring out here?
Well, he highlights a few types. There's reasoning with evidence.
Okay, like using facts to support your ideas.
Exactly. Then there's deep delving.
So not just scratching the surface.
Right, going deeper, seeing the complexities and nuances.
Okay.
And then there's capturing the core essence.
Like the main point.
Yeah, getting to the heart of something. It's not everything, but it's a good start.
Yeah, it gives us a focus. This is all very deliberate, very different from just assigning busy work and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
And that brings us to this distinction between learning and work. What's the difference there?
He talks about how this idea of learning as work is really ingrained in our system,
Okay.
and it has these historical ties to child labor laws, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is.
And it often leads to classrooms where the main focus is just finishing tasks.
Getting the work done.
Exactly. The students are workers, the teachers are managers.
I can see that.
Yeah. But in a learning-oriented classroom, the priority is the learning itself.
Okay.
The tasks are just a way to get there.
A vehicle.
Yeah, a vehicle. And teachers in these classrooms, they introduce activities by focusing on what students can learn and discover.
Instead of just the steps to complete the assignment.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a subtle shift.
It is,
Yeah.
but it can make a big difference.
It's about the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly. And he talks about this experiment in Colorado,
Yeah.
where teachers who were under pressure to get good student performance, which is a very work-oriented mindset,
Yeah.
they ended up using more controlling teaching methods.
Oh, interesting.
And it actually led to worse student performance.
So it backfire.
It did. And it shows how important it is to have what he calls facilitative expectations,
Facilitative expectations.
where the focus is on supporting the learning process. And that has to go hand in hand with good teaching practices.
Okay.
Both are needed.
So just having the right mindset isn't enough.
No, you need both. That's really interesting that the pressure for performance can actually hurt learning.
Yeah, it is. So the text also talks about understanding versus knowledge. What's the difference in a culture of thinking?
We use these terms interchangeably sometimes.
Yeah.
But he makes a distinction. He says knowledge is like accumulating facts and skills,
Okay.
things you possess, basically.
They have them.
Yeah. But understanding is more like knowing your way around a subject.
I like that.
It's a quote from David Perkins. It's about applying knowledge flexibly in new situations.
No, it's active.
It's active, yeah. It's something you do.
It's not just having the information, it's knowing what to do with it.
Right. It's like knowledge is the raw materials, and understanding is knowing how to use them.
To build something.
To build something, yeah. And he brings up this Teaching for Understanding framework, or TFU.
TFU.
Yeah. It has 4 parts: generative topics, understanding goals, performances of understanding, and ongoing feedback.
Okay, break that down for us.
So generative topics are those big ideas that are worth exploring.
Okay.
Understanding goals are about defining what we want students to understand, not just know.
Right, not just memorize.
Exactly. Performances of understanding are tasks that require students to apply their knowledge in different ways.
So they have to actually use it.
Yeah. And ongoing feedback helps guide the learning process.
So it's a whole system.
It is. But he says that for TFU to work, we have to change our expectations.
For everyone involved.
Yeah. Students need to understand that the goal is deep understanding, not just memorizing facts.
That's a big shift.
It is. If we don't address those expectations, both teachers and students can get frustrated.
Right, because they're not on the same page.
Exactly. He uses this math example of following rules versus problem solving
Okay.
to show the difference between teaching for knowledge and teaching for understanding.
Like just knowing the formula isn't enough.
No, you have to know how to use it in different situations.
And he found that a lot of tasks for teacher certification didn't actually require much thinking.
Yeah, they lacked high cognitive demand.
So we need to push for more than just rote learning.
We do.
So this focus on deep thinking leads us to encouraging independence and a growth mindset.
Yeah, these are essential.
How do they fit into a culture of thinking?
He argues that when we set expectations for learning and understanding, and when we use those deep learning strategies, we're automatically encouraging independence in students.
Okay.
And he lists a bunch of benefits that come from that.
Like what?
More resilience.
So they don't give up easily.
Yeah. They're also more open to new learning opportunities. They're more motivated.
That's huge.
It is. They have a more intrinsic drive to learn.
They want to learn for the sake of learning.
Exactly. And they're better at collaborating. They develop a growth mindset.
We'll talk more about that in a second.
Okay. Their self-esteem improves, and they develop lifelong learning habits.
Wow, that's quite a list.
It is. And it all comes from encouraging independence.
So how does growth mindset tie into all this?
Growth mindset is the belief that you can develop your abilities and intelligence.
So it's not fixed.
Right. It's the opposite of a fixed mindset, where you think you're born with a certain amount of talent, and that's it.
And Carol Dweck has done a lot of research on this.
She has. And her research shows that people with a fixed mindset, they tend to give up when things get hard.
Yeah, I could see that.
They avoid challenges because they're afraid of looking bad. They judge themselves harshly.
But people with a growth mindset, they see challenges as opportunities.
Yeah. They see setbacks as part of the learning process.
And they see effort as the key to success.
Exactly. So cultivating a growth mindset is super important in a culture of thinking.
Because it allows you to take risks.
Yeah, to experiment, to learn from mistakes.
That's crucial. So we've talked about mindset, and now I want to talk about language.
Okay.
How does the language teachers use affect a culture of thinking?
It has a huge impact.
Really?
Yeah, the specific words we choose, the way we interact, it all shapes the culture.
Interesting.
He uses this example of Lisa and her See, Think, Wonder routine.
You think, wonder.
And even in how she introduces the activity, she uses language like we and might be
Okay.
to create this sense of collaboration and openness.
So it's subtle, but it matters.
It does. And when she interacts with students during the routine, she doesn't just say right or wrong. She asks questions like, what makes you say that?
She's prompting them to think deeper.
Exactly. So she's shifting from language that judges to language that encourages reflection.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Richard talks about developing a language of thinking.
Yeah, that's important.
What does that mean?
It's about having the words to talk about cognitive processes, to cue specific actions, and to self-regulate our thinking.
So instead of just saying think,
Right? That's too vague. We might want them to consider alternatives, or make predictions, or ask insightful questions.
and we need the language to do
And
that.
we do. He also talks about meta-strategic knowledge.
Okay, what's that?
It's our awareness of our own thinking strategies. And having the vocabulary to name them helps us use them.
Makes sense.
So how do students learn this language of thinking?
Yeah, how do we teach them?
Mostly through immersion, being around people who use it.
Like in the classroom.
Yeah. But teachers can also be more active. They can notice and name what students are doing. Or use reinforcing language to highlight specific thinking processes.
So everyone can see it happening.
Exactly. He also talks about the language of identity.
Language of identity.
So calling students readers, writers, scientists.
They start to see themselves that way.
Yeah, it activates those ways of thinking. Even using conditional language can help.
So
It keeps discussions open. And he also critiques generic praise.
Like, good job.
Yeah. He says we should give specific action-oriented feedback.
So they know what to do next.
Exactly. And active listening is so important too.
Mhm.
Challenging ideas in a respectful way, inviting others to contribute.
It all matters.
It does. Even something as simple as posting a list of thinking roles in the classroom can help.
Like editor, analyst, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds everyone of the language we're trying to use.
So it's about being intentional with language.
It is.
Every word choice matters. Okay, so we've talked about mindset, language, and now time.
Okay.
How does the way we use time contribute to a culture of thinking?
He actually calls time a cultural force.
That's interesting.
It reflects our values and shapes the learning experience.
Okay.
How we use time shows what we prioritize. And in a culture of thinking, learning has to be a top priority.
So we need to make time for it.
We do. He gives this example of Nathan, who does individual feedback sessions with students.
all right.
Even though it takes a lot of time, he prioritizes it because it helps students understand.
Yeah, it's an investment.
It is. And we should also think about our energy levels, not just time. Some things, like really engaging with students, can be energizing, even if they take more time.
More than like grading papers.
Yeah, which can be draining, even if it's quicker.
So it's about being strategic.
It is. He talks about the big rocks analogy.
Okay, I like analogies.
The most important things have to go in first, or else the smaller, less important things will fill up all the space.
So we have to schedule thinking time.
We do. And he brings up Mary Bud Rowe's research on wait time.
Wait time.
It's how long teachers wait after asking a question.
Okay.
Or after a student answers.
Okay.
And she found that teachers usually wait less than a second.
That's not much time.
It's not. And it doesn't give students enough time to think.
Or to build on each other's ideas.
Yeah, it shuts down deeper thinking.
So what did she suggest?
Increasing wait time, even just by a few seconds.
And what happened?
Students started thinking more deeply.
Right.
They asked better questions, they participated more, and they were more confident.
That's amazing, just from waiting a little longer.
It is. He also says that we should manage our energy, not just our
Oh,
time.
right, because energy is a resource.
Yeah, it's renewable.
Yeah.
He suggests doing an energy audit.
What's that?
It's figuring out what energizes you and what drains you.
So you can make better choices about how you spend your time.
Exactly. And we should reflect on how we use time and even ask students for their input.
That's interesting.
It can help us improve.
So much to think about with time. All right, next up is modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And the outline says that teachers are always modeling, whether they realize it or not. Yeah, that's a powerful idea.
So what does that mean for us?
It means we have to be mindful of what we're modeling.
Because students are watching.
They are. He talks about different types of modeling. There's thinking aloud.
So showing your own thought process.
Yeah. Like Natalie when she showed her students how she writes poetry.
She walked them through it.
She did. And then there's modeling learning itself.
Okay, what does that look like?
It's about embracing not knowing.
Being okay with not having all the answers.
Exactly. And being willing to learn from mistakes.
Being vulnerable.
Yeah. It creates a safer space for students to take risks.
Okay.
And then there's interactive modeling.
So more like showing them how to do something specific.
Yeah, the how-to.
So it's not just about the final product, it's about the process and the attitude.
Right. And our brains actually have mirror neurons.
Mirror neurons.
Yeah, they fire more strongly when we identify with the person modeling.
So it's easier to learn from someone you connect with.
It is. So modeling has to be intentional.
We have to think about it.
Yeah. Even something small like apologizing for a mistake and saying how you do it differently.
That's powerful.
It is. It models reflection and accountability.
So we're not just modeling perfection.
No, we're modeling how to learn and grow.
I like that. All right, we've talked about a lot of things that contribute to a culture of thinking.
Yeah, we have.
But what about the learning itself? How do we create opportunities for deep learning?
He says that opportunities are the conditions that make action possible.
So there would allow learning to happen.
Yeah. And he says we need to shift our focus from the final product to the process.
So how they get there.
Right. What are they doing mentally? That's what matters.
So it's about the thinking involved in the task.
Exactly. He uses the example of Tom, who teaches Shakespeare,
Okay.
and Tom focuses on student interpretation.
He doesn't just tell them what to think.
No, he has this task called the mathematical formula for Iago.
Interesting name.
It is.
Yeah.
It gets students thinking deeply about the character. And then there's David Reel, who does this VoiceThread project on migration.
VoiceThread, okay.
It gets students actively involved with the information.
Instead of just passively reading,
Right. The key is for students to be doing something with the information.
not just absorbing it.
Exactly. And then there's Michael's Music to Save Music project.
Music to save music, okay.
It has a stage built in for creativity and exploration.
Sounds cool.
It is. And Rich Hart emphasizes that students are more engaged when they see the purpose of a task.
When they see the bigger picture.
Yeah. And he even addresses the issue of standardized tests.
That's a big one.
It is. He says research shows that complex thinking tasks actually improve basic skills.
So it's not either.
No. And he gives this example of the biggest smile problem,
Okay.
which encourages students to make claims and investigate.
And even something like Think, Pair, Share can be a tool for deeper thinking.
It can.
So it's about designing tasks that challenge students.
Yeah, to really grapple with ideas and apply their knowledge.
That makes sense. Okay, next up is the power of routines.
Okay.
So how are thinking routines different from regular classroom management routines?
They're different because they're designed to support thinking.
Okay.
Management routines are about organization and behavior.
Right.
But thinking routines give students tools to think.
Like mental frameworks.
Yeah. He gives the example of Caitlin, who uses claim support question, or CSQ,
CSQ.
in your math class. Students make claims about math concepts, back them up with evidence, and ask new questions.
Sounds rigorous.
It is. And Jonas uses CSQ with dice rolls to explore numbers.
Okay.
And Kathy uses it with a paper airplane experiment to get students predicting and explaining.
So these routines can be used in lots of different ways.
They can. And they're flexible. They can be adapted.
So they're not just rigid formulas.
No. And over time, they can become part of how students think.
They internalize them.
Yeah. And he encourages teachers to try out different routines and see what works.
So it's about finding the right tools for your classroom. So thinking routines become part of the classroom culture.
Yeah.
They support the thinking process. Okay, so we've talked about language, routines, and now interactions.
Yeah, okay.
Why are interactions so important in a culture of thinking?
Because they show us the relationships in the group,
Okay.
and they're how we learn the norms and values.
So it's about how we treat each other.
Exactly. He talks about Leslie Rivas's Spanish class
Okay.
and how her positive interactions create a safe and supportive environment.
That's so important.
It is. Students say that trust and respect are crucial for learning.
Yeah, they need to feel safe to share their ideas.
They do. And there's this game called In Brighton,
And Brighton. Okay.
where students are given specific roles in discussions.
Everyone has a part to play.
Yeah. And it leads to more participation and deeper engagement.
So it's different from the traditional question and answer format,
It is. He contrasts that with more dialogic interactions.
where there's more back and forth.
Yeah. He talks about Cameron, who uses the Microlab protocol and the GSCE routine
GSCE, okay.
to get students thinking deeply about the Khmer Rouge.
So they're not just memorizing facts.
No, they're analyzing and synthesizing information.
Okay.
He also recommends being explicit about classroom norms.
Like ground rules for discussion.
Yeah, and using stories to illustrate those norms.
Stories can be so powerful.
They are, and the questions we ask are important too.
How so?
They should encourage deeper thinking and connections between ideas.
Okay.
He talks about moving from ping pong to basketball in discussions.
What does that mean?
Ping pong is that back and forth between teacher and student,
Right.
but basketball is more like everyone passing the ball around.
So everything involved.
Yeah, and we can even ask students what teacher behaviors they value.
To get their perspective.
Exactly, and even little rituals can help build connection.
Like a greeting at the beginning of class.
Yeah, something like that.
So interactions are all about building a community.
They are a community where everyone feels safe and respected.
That's beautiful. Okay, last but not least, we have the learning environment itself.
Mm-hmm.
How does the physical space affect a culture of thinking?
He says that the environment is like the body language of an organization.
Interesting.
It communicates values and influences behavior.
Okay.
So traditional schools with rows of desks,
Uh-huh.
that reflects a view of learning as a solitary activity.
You're on your own.
But environments that are designed for collaboration and flexible grouping,
Yeah.
those are better for a culture of thinking.
Okay.
He talks about Kathy Hanawalt's classroom.
Okay.
She has different zones for different activities and lots of invitations to learn.
So it's inviting,
It is. And she
Yeah.
has this theme of, what's the other story?
encouraging different perspectives.
Yeah. And then there's Nellie Gibson's classroom, inspired by Reggio Emilia.
Reggio Emilia, okay.
She documents the learning.